And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the free market of the rational standard. I wear too many hats. Today is it was going to be an entirely special episode. It's only going to be half a special episode, but we are joined by one of our increasingly regular guests, Joe Emilio, and he's done something very exciting recently. His debut documentary, and we're going to be getting into that a little bit later. And we're also joined by David Ansara. Zakes unfortunately could not make it today, but I think we're going to have a full program actually, because while we did plan to be talking about property rights and land grabs today exclusively, something happened, as everyone knows, in the last 24 hours that has wound South Africa up again in some craziness. So short kind of too lazy don't read is that Andrew Whitfield, the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry, was fired by the so-called president because apparently he went on a trip to the US in earlier this year without permission. Now, the DA has responded to this. So Andrew Whitfield is a DA member. He's part of the DA delegation to the Government of National Unity. And he's one of two deputy ministers of trade and industry. I think the other one is an ANC minister, I think, and obviously the minister, Park Stow, is an ANC minister. The DA has, I think, responded quite strongly, but let me not get ahead of myself. We'll see how this plays out. But they have said that if the ANC or if Ramaphosa doesn't fire the corrupt ANC members of his cabinet within the next 48 hours from yesterday when they made the announcement, so a few of those hours have already passed, then something big will happen. Now, reach in your imagination for what that might be. I'm assuming, and I hope that means that the DA is saying that it will then pull out of the GNU, or failing that, do something else that is radical and a big splash. But I guess the the worry is that this will be another moment of, well, we're going to insist in a strongly worded letter that in fact something happened, and I really hope that's not it. As I said on X, it's insult after insult after insult by the ANC, and every time you do not reciprocate or do something that meets the insult, kind of on the same response in kind, basically, you just embolden the bad actors in government, which is not just the ANC. It's primarily the ANC, but also people like Gayton McKenzie, who is now taken to X to accuse Andrew Whitfield of white privilege or whatever. So let's, guys, I hope this is a watershed moment. Joe, maybe we'll go to you first. What your sense is, but I hope this is a watershed moment. I know people know me as the guy who thinks the GNU should just end. Yes, that I'm sure that's kind of true, but I am willing to take something else that's also big, with the DA staying in the GNU, but then actually fighting. I would be happy with that. But tell me what your sense is, man.
Well, I'm a little bit more, I guess, cynical than you are, Martin, because I want the GNU to just stop, or at least not the GNU. Let me rephrase. I want the DA to get out. I want them to do that supply, and what's it that you mentioned before, the
Confidence
supply,
and supply.
confidence and supply. Yeah, that would have been. They should have done that from the very beginning. All the ANC has managed to do since the inception of the GNU is make the DA look bad. I have seen it time and time again. Every time I talk about the DA on my channel or on social media, the amount of people that come in and say I'm never voting DA again and all that stuff, it's countless. It really, especially since the GNU has been formed, and since the NHI was signed in, expropriation, when John was in the Oval Office, time and time again, and every step of the way, it's okay. This time we're gonna You ANC people, we're gonna come after you. And then nothing happens. Oh, let's John quickly flip-flops and goes, yeah, but guys, come on. We've got to work together. We're no longer really the opposition. We're all in this together in the government of national unity, and we want to sing kumbaya and hope that everything's just going to work out, forgetting that he's dealing with communists that really don't give a rat's ass what he thinks, or what the DA thinks. It's very clear. Fikile, Mashatile, even Cyril have said that they don't care what the DA thinks. And even if they haven't said it outright, they've definitely alluded to it. They've shown it in their actions. They've shown it in nearly every single step of the way. The GNU has some big issue. The ANC is very quick to just, shrug them aside or whatever. The only thing that the DA has done, and surprisingly as well, the EFF, the DA and the EFF have done good for South Africa, is that VAT, they stopped the VAT increase. And you mentioned Gayton McKenzie, and it's still surprising to me that people applaud him, because it's like, he voted for the VAT, guys. Like, you guys forget about that. So Gayton just seeks an opportunity to bash the DA whenever he can, because the DA also bashes the PA. It's typical politics, but at the end of the day, what is going to happen now? I don't know, man. Again, we've been disappointed so many times by the DA that I really, I'm like you, Martin. I'm like, I have no hope. I'm like, no, this is not going to happen. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to say, they'll say something. They'll write a nice wordy letter and they'll wave their fingers at, But at the end of the day, I think the DA is enjoying their nice paycheck, and I think they will try to put a little bit of pressure. But at the end of the day, if the ANC stomps its feet and says, no, we're not going to change, and call DA's bluff, I think the DA is just going to find another way to spin it and say, oh, well, guys, we tried to push them, but we have to work together as the GNU, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's going to be the ultimate outcome. If I am wrong, and I am going to be happy to be wrong, the DA does leave, well, that's going to be a major shakeup. And before everybody starts coming at me, because a lot of the DA supporters, I think, are quite brainwashed, because they think, or they're quick to say, oh, but if the DA isn't there, we're going to have the EFF or the MK, or, we're going to have a doomsday coalition. I don't think the GNU is doing any better. And I don't think having the MK and EFF is going to accelerate anything. I think there's going to be a lot of infighting, as we see all the time with the EFF, MK, and ANC. The three of them cannot agree on anything. They do want to destroy South Africa through socialism. That's about the only thing that they have in common. But in terms of how to get there, they're constantly fighting, constantly at each other's throats. And at the end of the day, I think the citizens will have to step up and save the country, either by going to the ballot at the next elections, or just by, supporting one another and building infrastructure themselves, as we've already seen in some municipalities, as you guys showed in your roadshow from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, that the people are already doing that anyway, because a lot of the municipalities are failing. So I think that's the direction South Africa is going in, if we continue down this path, or if EFF, MK gets involved. I don't think it's going to be that big of a schlep. I think at the end of the day, when the Doomsday Coalition is in power, I think the people will come to the ballots even more to change, complete regime change of the South African government. But yeah, as for what the DA is going to do, I think they're done.
David, what's your sense?
Well, I think it's very interesting that Andrew Whitfield has had the sword of Damocles now fall on his head after been suspending there for so long. I met Andrew quite a few years ago now. And yeah, I think he's a very capable, competent, effective guy with a clear patriotic sense. But in some ways, if you look at his track record within DTIC, I wouldn't say that he's been, confrontational or, really confronted the significant pillars of DTIC policy, like BBBE, a lot of trade protections, a lot of the industrial subsidies, and so on. So I think it's somewhat ironic that it is Andrew that has been punished in this way. And I think it just speaks to the contempt that the ANC has had for its coalition partners since the ink started drying on the statement of intent. They've been not acting in good faith. And I think maybe credit to the DA for, kind of tolerating that. But, also critically, you have to say, well, at what point does kind of a slight lack of respect turn into utter contempt? And what are you willing to tolerate? And, I think the DA kind of painted itself into a corner here because they, as Joe mentioned, were at pains to remind everybody that the alternative to a GNU was the chaos and destruction of the Doomsday Coalition. And not only at the time when the GNU was formed, but also throughout, whenever you see kind of public statements from DA leadership, they say that they saved South Africa. And of course, that provides something of a blank check to the ANC to act in this abusive way, because they can say, well, look, you yourselves have said that you rescued single-handedly South Africa from the claws of the EFF and the jaws of MKP. So now when it comes down to it, they have to absorb that publicity risk. So, I think the DA are kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. But I definitely think, obviously, you only leave the GNU once, and this is a nuclear option to dissolve the GNU. Look, there could be other formations in the future, but, I think if they're going to draw red lines, then they have to also respect their own red lines. If the ANC walks over those red lines, there must be consequences for that. And I think that is part of the brinkmanship. So, I think the DA does need to show its muscle. And there was a glimmer of that during the VAT conflict. And I think a lot of people saw that as actually a very healthy thing. And I've been saying in a lot of my public commentary that actually what we need to get away from in South Africa is this kind of consensus-seeking model, because the consensus ultimately reinforces the policy status quo. And that is an ANC policy status quo. And those policies are not just a little bit inconvenient or somewhat constraining our competitiveness. They are fundamentally damaging the pillars of our economy and our society. So, going along to get along within the GNU, maybe there was a case for it in the beginning, avoiding the kind of so-called doomsday. But also think you have to look at the internal dynamics of the so-called doomsday partners, right? Like we've had Floyd Shivambu leaving MKP. There seems to be big man syndrome with Jacob Zuma. He's obviously a very shrewd player, but he hasn't really been able to build the party structures at the grassroots. And, what happens with a big tree is that nothing grows underneath its shade. So I'm very doubtful that they would be able to kind of play a significant role in that respect. And then EFF similarly, I mean, Julius Malema is isolated. Joe put out a video. Oh, no, I think it was Ronaldo actually. Sorry, Joe. Saying what's wrong with Julius Malema. I'm conflating all the pod bros in my mind here. He's looking a little bit anxious, a little bit like he's a bit concerned about his political fate. And so I think actually the landscape with these two parties has changed quite a lot. I think they're a lot weaker than they were a year ago. And I don't think they would be able to inflict as much damage. There would obviously be a short-term volatility and markets going ballistic. But there's also obviously this potential scenario of confidence in supply. And I think the Free Market Foundation has been one of the sole voices arguing for a ANC minority government rather than a coalition. And I think that might be a scenario that starts to materialize if the DA leaves. And confidence in supply, ultimately, it's an ANC minority government. They're still in power, they control the executive. But very importantly, the domain of the legislature now becomes the key arena in which political contestation occurs. And the VAT conflict early in the year was not something that was playing out in the corridors of the union buildings or in cabinet meetings. That was in the legislative domain. That was the DA and other parties using its legislative power to hold the ANC to account, to block the budget from passing through. And so that could be a model for much more robust, rigorous, effective, and accountable political dispensation in the wake of the GNU. So I think obviously there's going to be short-term volatility. There's going to be some costs involved to the GNU dissolving, but that doesn't mean that South Africa will end, and there will, I think, be a new dynamic that will be introduced. Martin.
Yeah, so I think both of you raised important points there. Kind of the thing with the doomsday coalition that Joe said, actually it's been that bad to some degree already. I think the important thing is it can always get worse. Yes, sure, but it's not clear to me, and I mean with maybe with hindsight, one can say, well, during the election we were a lot more concerned with this, but it's not at all clear to me that the ANC shacking up with MK is necessarily doomsday. What is MK? MK until what 10-20 minutes ago used to be the government under Jacob Zuma. That was MK effectively. And while a lot of people today say that it was worse under Zuma, the 8 wasted years, than today, I am completely not sure about that. I think that the Zuma years are increasingly starting to feel like the good old days to me, when the biggest controversy really was corruption, which is horrible. Of course, we all agree corruption is bad, but that was what the worry was. Sure, policy was bad, but I don't remember thinking during the Zuma years that South Africa was in existential danger. I am feeling that every single day of my life now under Cyril Ramaphosa, that there is existential threats against this country, given the the direction that his administration in particular has taken. So I am not at all sure that if the ANC forms a coalition of MK, which of course is going to be a corrupt mess, I'm not sure that that's doomsday. I think the EFF is a slightly different story, but then, David, you make an important point that both of these entities are actually somewhat of a shadow of their former selves. I think still dangerous, but I'm not sure the doomsday message works anymore, to the degree that I think we are experiencing a form of it already. If I'm honest, I think we are in a doomsday coalition with the added disadvantage of having the DA giving the doomsday a pretty face almost, and that to me has been unfortunate. The other thing you brought up, David, is that the DA has argued itself into a corner, and very surprising to me really is that both Ryan Coetzee and Gareth van Onselen, who are people that I would kind of consider to be individuals who tend to defend the DA, even on occasions when I don't think the DA should be defended. That's kind of where I would box the two of them. But even both of them have, in just the last few hours, gone on to X and said, DA, you've kind of made a boo-boo here by constantly saying, or constantly coming back and saying, no, we can't leave, we can't leave, we can't leave. I mean, that is now the issue that you're facing. And I think, to be fair, every political party kind of runs into this at some stage. Like, you say something, now you're bound by it, and you're going to inevitably have to break the promise. I don't think that's the end of the world. I do think the longer you leave it, the worse it becomes. So that goes to your point about the kind of short-term volatility. And my view on that would be, the DA needs to break that promise sooner rather than later. Because if we get close to the 2026 local elections and then to the 2029 national elections, and the DA leaves the coalition, then I think that'll be terrible for the party. That'll be absolutely horrendous for the party. But if it does it now and bites the bullet and says, guys, we overstated our case, we made a mistake, mea culpa, maybe some senior leadership resign, maybe, then I think DA voters will be mad, the markets will be mad for a while, and then things will kind of settle back into a healthy dynamic where we have kind of an opposition formation in South Africa that actually kind of stands up for what is right. So I think that if leaving the GNU is on the agenda, it's better to do it sooner rather than later. And I think now is an opportune time. I think there have been many opportune times in the rearview mirror to do so, but now it's again an opportune time to kind of cut losses. And then just I guess a final point now is. Um, there are many ways that this can play out. So Richard Wilkinson said on X yesterday that if the ANC is willing to keep everyone in the GNU except the DA, and they bring in Action SA, and I mean Herman Mashaba has been working for the ANC for the last year already anyway, then they can still have a majority. Then the GNU minus the DA still has a majority, and Bob's your uncle. You have a stable government. Well, stable is a relative word, but you have a stable government with the opposition restored. I think that's the prospect of that is very appealing to me. But even if the DA leaves and Action SA says they won't join, and the Freedom Front then also leaves, and you have a minority government, as you've both said, confidence and supply is still an option. You can still have the DA saying, okay, Ramaphosa, it's clear we cannot govern you with you. We do not get along. We don't understand each other. We can't govern. We can't co-govern. But we are willing to keep you in power as a minority government, provided you don't kind of implement radical policy, and we'll adopt your budgets and we'll keep you as president. You can still do that. You can still do that. So already you have two options, two, I would say, very politically viable options that don't lead to the immediate collapse of the country. And then that third option, ANC MK coalition, it's not great. I'm not kind of defending the MK here. It's not great. I also don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. For me, the bottom line is you have to keep the EFF out of the halls of power, and I think that's doable. And I think the ANC probably agrees with me. I don't think the ANC wants really either MK or the EFF, but certainly not the EFF to kind of join in the patronage networks. So I think that DA supporters should be perhaps a little bit less hysterical about this. I think that the DA maybe there is something to be said for this was a learning opportunity, and that the DA is now kind of engaged in national government, and they can see kind of how things work, and maybe we can say, okay, good, so that's now happened. It's been a good opportunity for the DA, but I think the potential of driving reform. I think the potential of, I mean, they said this was a government for jobs and growth. Unemployment is up, growth is down. That didn't work out. I think the potential for good reform in this term is gone. So I think the DA has come and done what it could, without downplaying the good work that Dean McPherson is doing in attacking corruption in public works, and Leon Schreiber in kind of cutting queues at Home Affairs. I think all of these are important, but the potential for reform is exhausted and done. So I think the DA returning to the opposition benches, and David, crucial point, making parliament a dynamic environment where nothing is fiat accompli. And someone asked in the comments, would this mean that MK has to give up their seats? Yes, yeah. So if the DA leaves the GNU, then they become the official opposition again. So MK will need to go sit somewhere else. So yeah, that is how it would happen. That is how it would work. And I think that'll be good, because then the DA can take real advantage of the new parliamentary reality, which it hasn't yet done. Joe, any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have an interesting question for both of you. So I mean, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but let's play something out. So we speak about like, okay, the DA should leave, shouldn't leave, blah blah. But I really want to try a thought experiment where, let's say in this scenario, the DA announces tomorrow or Sunday or whenever, we are leaving the GNU. We're doing it. We're leaving. Okay, Martin, you alluded to some of the backlash that might happen, markets and all that stuff. But I think maybe what people are also wondering is like, because this kind of popped up in my head now when you were talking, is if the DA leaves and becomes official opposition, MK is kicked out and all that stuff, great. What real power do they have to instill change? Because maybe there is, I'm being a bit of devil's advocate here, maybe there is a point that when John says, oh, we got to stay in the GNU to instill change, even though they're kind of failing at doing that, maybe they have a little bit more power than we're aware of to try and chip away at the National Democratic Revolution, even though, again, they're not doing such a good job. I don't know. I'm just trying to understand, if they leave the GNU, is that really going to be a good thing for South Africa? Can the DA still do something with that? Can South Africa still be saved? Regardless of who joins, and let's pretend for a second that the GNU, MK and EFF don't join it. Let's just say they just instead of it 10 parties, it's 9 parties. The GNU continues as is, but just the DA leaves. What happens in that scenario? What do you think? How do you think that could positively affect South Africa?
You want to take a first crack, David?
Yeah, Joe's always coming with the difficult questions here. So, I think you also have to say compared to what. So if you look at the Bella Act, for example, that puts the DA Minister Gwarube in quite a difficult position, because she had to then go and simultaneously justify the act and also allay concerns that this might not be as bad as everyone's fearing, and that through regulation they might soften or temper some of the worst aspects of the legislation. And that nuance doesn't really get conveyed in the communications. All people see is, well, I used to have autonomy over my school governing body and now I don't. And the blame then gets cast in the DA's direction. So, I think what a confidence in supply arrangement helps you to do is to have leverage. So you can say, well, look, we fundamentally reject the Bella Act. But then there also might be things that you might want to support. For example, a budget process which is more leaner and lower state spending, or some kind of privatization or decentralization initiative. So that introduces a whole new level of bargaining, I think, into the equation. Whereas before, there's this kind of ANC trope of collective responsibility of cabinet. So the whole cabinet is responsible for the entire policy agenda of the government. But the problem with collective responsibility is that nobody takes accountability or ownership over the bad policies. And so when you look at the totality of the policy framework, you see hostility towards free enterprise, you see undermining of private property rights, a bloated, inefficient state that's interfering in the economy. And the totality is what you're judged on as government. So, I think being able to distance yourself from those hostile policies, advocate very strongly for your constituents. And I think we also need to distinguish between what's in the national interest and then what's the national government's interest. And often those two things are at odds with one another. And I think the problem with the GNU is that it provides strength and support to the national government, which is ANC dominated, and not to the national interest. And the national interest, as we would define it, is private individuals who have sovereignty over their property, who are able to freely engage in commerce, whose rights are respected before the law, they have equality at law. That's what will enable South Africans to flourish. And it's on those measures that we have to judge the GNU. Some kind of like nebulous, we're doing this to save South Africa, it gets weaker and weaker over time. And I think that's how you justify that. So, I think just in terms of the PR, how the DA plays this, I think, will be very important. I'm just going to share my screen again. I think going back to Richard Wilkinson's Twitter, you prompted me to go and check out his feed, and he had an interesting take, which is submit a motion of no confidence in the president, vote in favor of it, and hope you win that vote. Then, when there's no government, renegotiate with the ANC or go into opposition. But don't resign from the government, never resign, always wait to be fired. That is an interesting take, I think, is, putting the ball in the ANC's court, forcing them to be seen as the bad guys, and so you can still play up a lot of that patriotic rhetoric. Like, listen, guys, we tried our best. We supported the GNU out of a patriotic duty, but these scullums in the ANC, they just couldn't tolerate us trying to root out corruption, and we were forced out. But the gamble with that is, if you don't resign and the ANC doesn't fire you, then you can continue to muddle along, which I think has its own shortcomings.
Yeah, I would say that don't give them a choice but to fire you. So I think Richard is right about the point about don't resign. But I think he's wrong about the point to wait to be fired. I think that if you need a way to get out of the GNU in a way that both strengthens your sense among your voters, your support amongst your voters, and keeps up appearances, just start doing the right things. Just start. If you're Siwiwe Garuba, just say, yeah, Bella, we're just not gonna go there. Don't show me it. I'm not gonna implement it. So please, I'm just gonna carry on. We're gonna retain governing power for school governing bodies. If you're Dean McPherson, you say that don't talk to me about the Expropriation Act. I don't care about it. I'm not going to implement it. Any official who applies for an expropriation through the Department of Public Works will be immediately vetoed and silenced. So just do the thing. Just do what you need to do. And if the ANC then doesn't fire you, then wonderful. Then we effectively have two governments in this country. And I think that shakes things up in a good way. But obviously, let's not dream fantasies. I think the ANC will fire the DA then. And then I think the DA will be able to say, well, look, why were we fired? We were fired because we wanted to protect property rights, because we were defending the autonomy of school governing bodies. That's why the ANC kicked us out of the GNU. And now we have what I think South Africa needs, is the DA back in the opposition. So I think Richard is right. Don't just meekly resign. Just get yourself kicked out. And there's easy ways to do that, I would say. And David, to reinforce the point you made about how the DA is kind of reinforcing the national government's interests rather than the national interest. I think around the Oval Office visit, I don't know if John said this at the Oval Office or whether he said this on Facebook. It's one of the two. But he effectively said something along the lines of, there's this doomsday coalition out there. It's the EFF and MK waiting in the wings. And we, along with President Ramaphosa, are the kind of moderate constitutionalists, and we're trying to protect South Africa from those people over there. And kind of not just saying it's the DA, which is, I would say, okay, fine, you can blow sunshine up your own bum, but that's not what he did. He said, we being the broad GNU, but specifically around Cyril Ramaphosa. Now that's a problem. That's a big problem in my view, especially when you're talking, as I think you need to assume you are now, to the Americans and to the world. You're not just speaking to South Africans anymore. And when you go around telling the countries that are now finally, after 30 years, taking an interest in what is happening in South Africa, if you go around as a ostensible and implicit expert on what's happening in this country, I mean, you're the former official opposition, people are going to think you have quite a bit of credibility when you speak. And if you go around saying President Cyril Ramaphosa is a good guy, he's trying to save South Africa, and he's kind of one of the lone pillars against destruction, you are lying. You are lying. You are being malicious. You're not playing politics. You are lying and you're being dishonest. That is disinformation. Cyril Ramaphosa is one of the number one antagonists in this battle. As I alluded to earlier, I think he's worse than Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma wants a palace. He wants money. He wants a lot of wives who get more money from the taxpayer. That is Jacob Zuma's dream. He has no lofty ideological ambitions. He might say something about NDR here and the power of chiefs there, but I mean, it's obvious, I think, to many of us that Jacob Zuma is not someone intrinsically motivated by ideology. Cyril Ramaphosa, if he's not intrinsically motivated by it, he has latched himself onto it to achieve what it is he wants, which is perhaps having a legacy. He seems like someone who wants to say that he did big things when he was president. That's what it seems like to me. But he is far closer to being a committed ideologue than I think any of his predecessors were. He is far more of a Chris Hani type figure than Mandela, Motlanthe, or Mbeki ever were, or Zuma. So going around telling the Americans that this guy is here to help, I think that has done a lot of harm to our cause and to the cause of reform in South Africa, because now there are people in around the world who could be giving strength to the arm of reform in South Africa, who think, oh well, thank goodness at least they have Ramaphosa as their president, so we don't actually have to worry too much. That is a problem. That is a big problem. But Joe, just to your question, and I don't want to imply that you're doing the same thing, but I have been seeing this amongst a lot of people making this argument that opposition is pointless. People saying that, oh, the DA will go back into opposition. Wow, they've been in opposition for 30 years. What is that? What did that help? I think there is something dangerous about that perspective. Every country, every democracy has an opposition and needs an opposition. Being in opposition means you are not in government, and that means you do not get to implement policies. So that's kind of just the nature of it. You're out of power, but you are a voice against power, and that voice is important. It's not always a powerless voice, especially if you get a little bit more Machiavellian. You could, as David said, have leverage. You could be doing backroom deals. You could be, and the DA needs to do a lot more of this because the ANC does this very well. You could be creating conflict among your enemies. You could be generating infighting amongst your enemies. So you could do all of that from the opposition. But being in opposition is a good in itself, even though you cannot stop the destruction. You need opposition. You need someone to be the voice of the voiceless. You need to be someone to say, not everyone is keen on this bad policy that the ANC is pursuing, and here we are, the living embodiment of it in Parliament. We currently don't have that. MK is a cuck opposition. They are absolutely atrocious. They are not standing up against bad policy, and then obviously the DA isn't either, not to the degree that it should be. So we have a grand consensus seeking that David kind of alluded to earlier, where all the formations of our politics effectively, if you're on the outside looking in, it looks like all the formations of our politics effectively agree to what is happening. There is some kind of protest, and some of us who are able to discern can see it. But the Americans wouldn't care that the DA is litigating on against the Expropriation Act on some obscure technical point. They see John Steenhuisen standing next to Cyril Ramaphosa in the Oval Office saying, "This is our government, and we're the reformers keeping the ANC, the EFF, and MK out." That's what people standing on the outside looking in see. Um, so yeah, we need a face of opposition again in this country, and I think to the DA's credit, they have always been a good opposition. They've not always been good liberals, and I have a lot of grievance against them for that. But they have been a good opposition in the committees, in PR. They have been able to call the ANC out whenever they do bad things. So they are a strong opposition, and I think they would be good back in the opposition now, especially as I said, having learned a lot, I think, having been in government for a year, and now being thrust into what would to them be a new. Remember, the DA has been out of the opposition for a year, so they haven't experienced the new parliamentary reality in the way that an opposition party would. So if they go back to the opposition, it would also be a new experience for them, and hopefully they I kind of mockingly referred to this earlier, but there would have to be some resignations. I mean, let's just kind of be honest about it. Hopefully the people that the DA it puts in place to lead it in this new phase, the second phase of the post 2024 reality, are more Machiavellian and can take more advantage of this changed landscape, and actually do the leverage thing that David alluded to earlier. That would be crucial in my view. The DA doesn't currently have much of that.
Martin, earlier
Yeah.
you said that you feel that the existential crises have ramped up. And could it be the case that in the absence of an effective and strong opposition, some of these more destructive forces have been unleashed? Right. So, I mean, it's maybe a counterfactual, but if you imagine that the DA hadn't gone into the GNU and say MK and or EFF had joined the government, they would have gone into hyper opposition mode and would have really exploited their role. So I think maybe in getting back to the publicity spin around this, they can say, well, look, we tried our best. We acted in the best interests of the country, but now we're reclaiming our role as strong and effective opposition. The timing is also really critical, with Helen Zille announcing or positioning herself as the DA's candidate for mayor of Joburg. I think now the sights are now being set on the 2026-27 local government elections. And, we have, for the first time in the history of South Africa, the ANC below 50%, at 40% of the parliamentary seats. This is massive potential, uncharted territory for the DA to exploit. So this is not the end of the game, the end of the GNU. So, yeah, I think buckle up. It's going to be an interesting ride.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I think we are going to be monitoring this very closely. I think we always have been kind of keeping our eyes on what the GNU is doing and what it isn't doing, maybe more importantly. And I think by the end of the weekend, we should have an answer to the eternal and most important question: will the DA do something rather than just wringing its hands and writing a strongly worded letter? We'll definitely know by next week. So exciting times. Hopefully people are able to travel outside of South Africa without having to get permission from Ramaphosa in the meantime. But I think that wraps us up for this first part of the conversation. And now let's go into perhaps the more exciting thing, and that is that Stolen Ground, Joe. That is Joe's debut documentary for his Newsflash platform. I was privileged to have been interviewed on the documentary and to have seen an early cut of it. I told Joe when he was asking me for feedback, I said I was gripped by it throughout, and also that this is something that many documentaries miss, that emotional kind of aspect to it that's necessary. It's not like it's an emotional thing rather than a factual thing, but you need to appeal to people's emotions to get them to take an interest in the kind of facts being presented. And I think Stolen Ground did that very well. And I encourage everyone watching to please have a look at the documentary. I'll just quickly share my screen here. Here you can see stolenground.co.za. It's a whole website that you can watch the trailer on. And it shows you how the Tygerberg Raceway looked a few short years ago. I was actually stunned by kind of how recent this is. 2020 is just a few short years ago when this was an active, used community asset, and then it turned into this kind of, I think, unequivocally political act, rather than actually a need for housing. There was no reason that these people had to go and live on the raceway. If you just look a few kilometers away from the raceway, which is an active asset, you see a lot of kind of open municipal land, which obviously we don't want to be land grabbed, but rather grab unused municipal land than an active kind of asset in the community. So this was, in my view, a very political act, and I think in the documentary that actually shines through. And you can watch the whole thing here or on YouTube on the Newsflash website. And Joe is also doing a fundraiser for the second edition of the documentary, with a goal of 150,000. And wow, produced the first one on a zero-rand budget. It does not show very high production quality. So yeah, I just want to say congratulations to Joe and those who worked with him on producing this. It's an important story, and we're gonna get into some of the substance soon. But first, I wanna give Joe an opportunity to maybe chat to us a little bit about what led to where did this idea come from? Why did you do it? Maybe if you have some insights about some of the logistics. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but yeah, just give us a sense.
Cool. Firstly, let me say thank you, Martin, for the awesome introduction and a nice overview there and showing the website. Yeah, so zero budget is true. Martin, you can attest to that. When I approached you the first time, I said, dude, I got no budget. Are you willing to be part of the documentary? And you were very eager to, and I'm extremely grateful that you were part of it. And by the way, guys, Martin, also being a little bit humble, Martin actually helped me quite a lot with the documentary in terms of the legal aspect of the PI Act and the constitutional side of things. As well as Mark Oppenheimer played a big role as well to help understand what the PI Act is, and they both really helped steer me to understand the laws and the flaws, and especially with the Expropriation Act as well. So thank you guys so much for that. And yeah, so how it started, I actually did a video. There was a guy on X named, his X name is LP. And he had a thread of all the different small towns in Cape Town and even other places, but he mainly focused on Western Cape. He had the Tygerberg Raceway, he had Grabouw, he had Hermanus, Kailicha, and he just showed like how they looked in like early 2000s. He went back in history through the Google Earth, took a screenshot. This is how it looked in 2000. And this is how it looks now in 2024, I think at the time, or 2025. And you could just see like, oh, the previous image was greenery and, you know, maybe a small neighborhood here and there. And then the next image was just overtaken by shacks and illegal occupiers. And I did a video on that. I was like, hey guys, and it was just after, it wasn't after the Oval Office meeting. It was before that. I remember there was a lot of talk about Trump had said that there's land invasions, and then Cyril came out and said, no, there wasn't, or there isn't. So it was just after that, in the beginning of the year, I made the video and I was like, hey guys, like this looks like people are taking land, if you know what I mean. And then in that video, I said, maybe I should do a bigger investigation into this, because I was curious to know how this is happening and why isn't anything being done? Like, this doesn't make sense. So I got a call from a friend of mine, Clay Wilson. Big shout out to him. He also helped, and he's the one that actually found the former owner of the raceway for me. He got me his contact details, so big shout out to him. And basically, he encouraged me to do a video on it. And then eventually, when we started talking to Chris and we started talking to other people, we realized, hey, this might make a very good documentary. Let's take a stab at it. And I just started interviewing people, started chatting to people. Martin, you were a big part of that. So you more or less know how everything kind of evolved. Yeah, by the time I think a few months later, I started editing. That took the longest, honestly. The editing was the big bulk of it. And yeah, that was it. The documentary was done and I released it to a very overwhelming response. Overshot my expectations completely, because today, actually, I just announced it because I just saw it moments before we went on. It's hit 100,000 views in under a week, which is fantastic. It's still going and growing, and I encourage everyone. Like, I am trying to raise funds for the next one, but as much as I would appreciate everybody donating, I have a backup buddy, and I think it's linked in the description. You donate whatever you can, 50 Rand, 1,000 Rand, doesn't matter. Every bit helps. But more importantly, I think we need to share this documentary again and again and again and again, and get people talking about it. I also am about to release another short video. Minka Liebenberg saw the trailer and the documentary. She left a comment on Facebook, and it's heartbreaking. It's really moving.
Is Minka related to Chris Liebenberg,
yes, she's the
protagonist
daughter.
of the
Yeah, she's the daughter of Chris, and what she says is very hard hitting. So I read her comment out, and I'm going to release that video probably after the stream. I encourage people to watch it and watch the documentary, and again share it, because she, at the end of her comment, she says that Stolen Ground gave them a voice, and that meant a lot to me, because interviewing Chris was not easy. And when he messaged me after the premiere to say that he thought it was brilliant, meant the world to me, because at the end of the day, as I started interviewing people, and as I started interviewing Chris and people related to the racetrack and uncovering the story, I knew that I had to be fair to everybody involved. I didn't want to make anyone look bad or good or whatever. I was literally just presenting facts and what people said. But for me, the most important thing was that Chris, I wanted people to understand and see what Chris went through, what he lost, how until now nothing's been done, and that is a huge injustice. And that for me was the most important thing to come through. And it seems like it did, because like Minka said, I gave them a voice, and that touched deep. So I encourage people to watch the documentary, and yeah, I mean, if you, Martin says it's great. David, I don't know if you've watched it yet, but Martin's a friend of mine, so he might be being nice. I know he's not. I know he's honest, but if you want unbiased opinions about the documentary, just go and check out the comment section. You'll see for yourself. Hundreds of people have commented saying excellent, brilliant, given their reviews. So if you don't take my word for it, take the viewer's word for it, and go watch it. I think it's super hard hitting. I'm very proud of it. I put a lot of work into it, and I think it's a story that needs to be told and shared, most importantly, with the world.
Yeah, David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I did watch the documentary, and I would really encourage everybody to go and check it out. The production quality, I think, exceeds the very small budget that Joe was working with. And I think, somebody in the comments, I think it was Nicholas, said that Joe has reset the standards. And I really thought that hit the nail on the head. But I think what I enjoyed about the documentary was that I learned a lot around the policy framework and the legal causes and constraints to property rights in South Africa. And, we're policy analysts. This is our bread and butter. But it also told a very human story of this ordinary guy, Chris Liebenberg, who had a passion for motor racing. He invested his life's work and capital into this project, only for it to be violently, forcibly taken from him. And it wasn't seized by the state, by some nefarious bureaucrat who was directing these forces. It was done by a mob of people, politically directed, obviously, which you explain in the documentary, but who were enabled by a legislative and regulatory framework, specifically the Prevention of Illegal Eviction Act, and also some of the lockdown regulations, which inhibited the ability of the city to evict these unlawful squatters. And I think you really brought it to life. You humanized this issue, and for me, it was a very powerful reminder about the importance of the work that we do. That private property rights is not just some like public policy preference, like, oh no, this is like good for economic growth or something. It's fundamental to who we are as people. Like when you invest your labor and your time and your passion into something, like it could be motorsport, it could be a small little manufacturing facility, it could be your home, it could be your kind of corporate office, whatever it is, that is of value to you and should be respected. And the state's role should be to protect those rights. That's really the kind of protection of life, liberty, and property. These are the kind of the core foundational duties of the state. And the state has all sorts of mechanisms, and the Constitution prescribes this progressive realization of your right to housing, but has neglected this basic duty. And I think the story of Chris Liebenberg, who seems to, by his account, have lost anything up to about 60 million rand of his investments there, never mind all of the jobs that would have created and all the secondary effects. This story, I think, really drives home that there are people in South Africa who want to make a difference, who want to contribute to their communities, to creating wealth, to creating socially beneficial things like sports clubs and other kind of community efforts. But if we don't get the basics right about what the duties of the state are, what our legislative framework should be, we're going to destroy the lives and livelihoods of these people. And, I think I just want to commend you, Joe, for how you articulated this message. I thought the production quality was outstanding, but also, very importantly, the narrative. I think this story should be watched by 10 times 100,000 people. This video needs to be watched by 1 million South Africans. Well, 62 million South Africans should watch this, but hopefully the algorithm helps you out there. But so if you haven't checked out the video, go and watch it. All of the usual things, the like button, the comments, the sharing, I think that would really help to disseminate this message. And Joe, well done from us at the FMF.
Wow. Thank you, David, so much. That's very kind words, and coming from you guys, it really means a lot to me. I just want to also, I saw my wife's commenting in the live chat, so I just want to give her a huge shout out because, listen, this took a lot of time and a lot of hours. And I think, Martin, you were the shortest interview I did. But the others, with the JP Smith interview was a whole hour that I had to cut down into 15 minutes or so. Same with Chris. Mark's was about 30 minutes. Anyway, the point is there was a lot of editing involved in this documentary. I don't think people realize. At least 2 weeks worth. If I had to sit down and focus on this. The only thing I had to focus on was editing this documentary. Would have taken me Monday to Friday, 8 hours a day for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks even. And the only way I was able to do it was with the tremendous help of my wife, who took the kids in the evening so that I could edit in the evening. Took the kids in the morning, took the kids in the weekend so that I could have a chance to edit as much as possible. And she also helped with the translation of Chris Liebenberg's section, and I think she did a phenomenal job of that. And she encouraged me to keep going, because there was a few parts where I was like, I think I bit off more than I can chew. How am I going to condense all this into an hour? How am I going to cut this? And she just kept on encouraging me to keep going. and she's been with me every step of the way, even after. So yeah, I just wanted to give her a very, very, very big thank you and credit for that.
And it's she's
And
worked hard herself. You know, she watched the video 99,000 times. I mean, that's impressive.
yes. So I have a lot to thank her for. That she knows every
Getting
line of the documentary.
repetitive strain syndrome from all the clicking.
Yes, but yeah, there she is saying, "Ready for the next one." Oh boy.
Mm.
Yeah, I definitely listen. I definitely want to do the next one. There's more. The Pi Act, I think, was a nice introduction to land invasions, but there's definitely a lot more to uncover. There's definitely a lot more to dig into, and I will be careful with how far I go deep, because there's some people that don't want me poking around. But I'll go as deep as I possibly can without compromising my safety. But the next one's going to require me to travel, still within the Western Cape, but I have to go quite far. The raceway is actually not too far from me, which was actually easy to access and stuff. And Chris also stays nearby me as well. So, and the interviews were just lucky. I think Martin was the only one that I had to do virtually, but everybody else, Luyolo and Mark, happened to be in Cape Town when I asked them for an interview. So that was just sheer luck.
Mm.
So, and Daisy wanted to be anonymous, but she's also in Cape Town. But the next area that I want to investigate is in the Western Cape, but it's about 3-4 hours out of Cape Town. And yeah, I'm going to need to get accommodation, and I also want to step up the game. You know, you guys say it was awesome production value. Thank you very much. But I literally filmed this with my iPhone. Like, that's, I don't know if that came through or anything, but yeah. And that's not a knock on iPhone. That's like,
Mm.
you really can film films with iPhone, and they're great equipment. But I would like to up the game, get a nice camera, something that is as close to Netflix as possible, because I would like to try and approach some of the big broadcasters, although I don't think they'll take it because of the narrative, but I'll still try to basically show it. And with Netflix and these other broadcasters, you have to film with certain formats and certain conditions and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that I can get it to that level. Again, with the help of the viewers who believe in what I'm doing and want to see more. I'm going to need your help to do that. And it's not just equipment, it's also accommodation expenses, security expenses, and then post-production expenses. Yeah, I sacrificed quite a lot of time with the family in order to get the first one done. I wanted to show people what I can do with no budget. Now imagine what I can do with even a small budget. So if you are inspired, if you really enjoy the story, if it resonates with you, then please help me make the next one, because like I said, there's so much more to uncover, and I think South Africans need to know what else is behind these land grabs in South Africa.
Yeah, I just want to kind of emphasize the fact that no one else is making documentaries like this. The only other times that these kinds of documentaries were made were by foreigners. People in South Africa are afraid. They don't want to say that the kinds of, or at least tell the kinds of stories that you've told of stolen ground. Because, I mean, let's be honest, it's very politically incorrect. The national consciousness is that Chris Liebenberg cannot be a victim. The people who now live on his racetrack, they are the victims. And in some sense, it is true that they are victims to some degree. But if you watch this documentary, and then David alluded to this aspect of it earlier, is the sense of hopelessness that you can see with Chris. So he lives in Cape Town. Hey, it's Cape Town. It's the most well-governed city on the continent. On the continent. And he had to resort to getting gangsters, criminals, thugs in his community to come and defend his property because the SAPs, I mean, banished the fort, but the local police couldn't solve his problem. Now, I'm not saying they didn't try. They tried. Thank you. They tried. They failed. and then unfortunately the gangsters also failed ultimately. Um, and what do you do as a South African? I think Chris is on the wealthier end of the spectrum. He failed to protect his property against civilians invading his land. What do you do as a normal middle class South African when you face this issue? You use an example, Joe, in the documentary of you arrive home and someone has pitched a tent in your backyard and they say, well, this is my home now. What do you do? I mean, I think most South Africans, and you can't blame them, they just completely put this out of their minds. They're perfectly aware that stuff like this is happening. But the more you think about it, the more horrified you just have to become at how perverse it is that the law, which is meant to protect you in your property, specifically your castle, the law is against you. The law is against you. The cops will maybe try something, but ultimately they will be against you. If you try and, as Mark explained, if you try and counter spoliate, if you see you grab the guy's tent and you throw it on the street, the cops are going to come and they're going to arrest you. They're going to arrest you for protecting your property. So these stories are extremely important. And I think, and I think I said this, I certainly told the DA this quite recently, is that people like me and David, and Jakes and Mark and so on, we can only take the argument so far. We are a bunch of policy nerds. I know David is a jock as well, so kudos to him on that. But we are primarily text based and like podcast based analysts and thinkers, and we put ideas out there. Um, but more than that, we cannot do. And what you did, Joe, is you took the kinds of ideas that we put out there, and you turned it into something that ordinary people can digest. I said earlier that emotional aspect, we don't do the emotion. We can't do the emotion. You did the emotion. You did it very well, and that is what people relate to. I mean, when I want to watch something as an ordinary person, when I've taken off my policy hat, I also want that emotional connection to what I'm watching. And you're able to do that. Other people make fictional movies. They're able to do that to some degree. This is the next frontier, I would say, of getting change done. So it's so vitally important that you continue to do this. That other people, I know Ernst van Zyl from AfriForum, he's also making documentaries, also excellent work that he's doing. Taking these things out of the realm of ideology, which again is crucially important, but there has to be that bridge between that and your ordinary person. And I think Stolen Ground is a very good, it's not a first attempt. You attempted it and you succeeded. So it's a very good first success. And we want to see a lot more of that, and just showing the absolute depravity, really the disgusting depravity that our, not just our politicians, but really our society at this stage, where we're all complicit to some degree, is imposing on innocent people like Chris Liebenberg, who just wanted to help. He just wanted to do good. He just wanted to do good for his community, and he was viciously punished for that. Now, thankfully, I think Chris Liebenberg is going to land on his feet, but there are so many other examples of people who just can't come back from it. And the fact that you have an appetite to get deeper into this is excellent, because you're going to tell their stories, and people are going to try to stop you. You alluded to this earlier. People are going to try to stop you the more you expose this absolute travesty. But it's important to do that work, and we're all definitely stronger for it, for what you've done here.
Thanks, Martin. Once again, thank you guys so much for all the kind words and the support. Yeah, I was just thinking about it now, like, you know, everything you just said about Chris and stuff. I think the biggest thing with this documentary is not just what he lost and all that stuff. You know, at the end I say it, like, I think the remarks I make and the closing that I do is very important for South Africans to wrap their head around and to understand, is that, you know, this PI Act our property rights have been eroding since 1998 when the Spy Act was signed into law. I didn't know about it. It was you, Martin and Mark who told me about it, and then I read the act, and then yeah, Mark explained it, you explained it, and I was like, this is insane. This type of stuff. And then the way J.P. Smith also explains the way the act is manipulated by the thugs and the gangsters and even the politicians, really opens your eyes to how flaky and skinny and vague this PI Act is, and it really is like I think almost like a stepping stone towards expropriation, right? So I think at least what I learned with doing this documentary is, the PI Act was kind of the foundation. They laid out their foundation, they let people take over land, and then the expropriation comes in years later, almost as a prime to take land as they see fit. And as I said in the documentary, I'm not saying that the government will. I'm saying they can, and you guys have spoken endlessly about the Expropriation Act and explained, the loopholes in it and the concerns with it. And I think that's, I had one comment, just one, on my documentary saying fearmonger much, and I was like, I'm not. I'm really just presenting the truth. And then I said, I actually commented back and I said, I think you can't handle the truth, because it is just the truth. Nothing so far. No one has been able to discredit what you've said, what Mark said, what J.P. Smith said, what anyone said. No one's been able to discredit the contents because, again, I presented facts in a digestible way. And I think the only thing that people are harping on is that Chris didn't own the land. He leased it, which I did make clear in the documentary. And whether, and again, it's very funny what's happening on social media, because they're like, oh, but he was leasing the land, so it's not really his. And it's like, whether he was leasing it or whether it was municipal or government or whatever, it's still a land grab, which shouldn't be happening, guys. Like, it doesn't matter. If you're renting a house and you have a contract with someone, right? So if you have, I don't know, Martin or David, if you guys are renting, but you guys, let's say you are, you have a contract with the landowner, right? For all intents and purposes, whatever is in your apartments is yours. Now imagine someone comes into that apartment, kicks you out, destroys your stuff, and takes over. That's still an injustice. That's still wrong. It doesn't make it any better.
Yeah, no, I rent. Right? What you see here, I'm renting this. So if I came home and someone was sitting here in my chair and they've turned it into a bed and so on, it's like, no, my property rights have been deprived from me. So renting, you have a limit. We call it a limited real right. You still have a property right. That's a property right that you have in the property that you are renting. So no, these people are ridiculous. Obviously, ownership is the stronger property right. But to say that your property hasn't been taken from you just because you're renting, no, nonsense. Jeez.
Yeah, Martin's being exploited by his. Martin's being exploited by his landlord there.
How dare they rent me this place? Yes, just exploit the buggers.
Yeah, but it's true. I think it also just underscores the fact that property rights is not just for the people who own property. It actually benefits everyone. Like you want in a functioning market economy to have property rights secure. It's not just for the so-called wealthy landlords. But yeah, I think there must be thousands of these kind of stories, Joe, that people like you and hopefully others can unearth. I remember when I was at the Institute of Race Relations, one of the stories that we were quite preoccupied with was the story of David Racase, who also basically had his land taken from under his feet, worth kind of looking into that again. But yeah, I think something that really enraged me was how entities like the Human Rights Commission basically came to the defense of the illegal land occupiers. And, I think it just kind of speaks to the corruption of our system, where you have these kind of entities, also hiding behind this mask of altruism and helping the poor victims, and actually ending up perpetuating injustice. And, I think there needs to be a lot more accountability for people in the intelligentsia, in the legal profession even, who give cover to these kind of actions. It's one thing for a ANC government to initiate these kinds of policies, but it's another when you see this overwhelming chorus of voices kind of supporting these kind of actions. And is it any wonder that, we see the kinds of phenomena that we're dealing with on a daily basis, not just in Cape Town, but here in our city as well, in Joburg, hijacked buildings. And I mean, who actually suffers the consequence of that? It's the landowners themselves who've been deprived of their right. But also think of the tenants in those buildings who are now prisoners of these gangsters, basically, who don't provide any meaningful services, who don't give a toss about the rights of them. Don't is it any surprise that you have these buildings collapsing? A few years ago, we had that major fire in downtown Joburg, which killed over 70 people. I think, and ultimately the Human Rights Commission is benefiting from taxpayer funds as well. So, I think we often focus on party politics in South Africa, but I think we need to shine a very critical light on some of these other sort of non-governmental or government-adjacent kind of entities that really provide a lot of ideological cover for some of these hostile policies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
The Human Rights Commission is go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to what David said there. It also angered me. I was actually shocked. I was beyond shocked that the South African Human Rights Commission put out an interdict to stop. It's such an oxymoron, not oxymoron, it's such an irony, because here's a man, like we just discussed, who's renting a place or whatever, and he has property on everything he built on that land is his. He built it from scratch. He fixed the racetrack. He put in drain pipes. He put in buildings. He put in ballast sitting areas and all that stuff, stadium-like sitting areas, fixed the track, all that stuff. He put his hard-earned money, that was his property, on that land. So he deserved to have his right protected. But instead of protecting his right, he protected the rights of criminals, literally. That boggles me beyond belief. But Martin, go ahead.
Yeah. The key thing, I mean, the Human Rights Commission's mandate, I mean, it doesn't give a crap about its mandate, but its mandate says to give effect to the Bill of Rights. So it's not like there's only one or two rights in the Bill of Rights. Section 25 of the Constitution says, Section 25(1) of the Constitution says, no one may be deprived of their property except in terms of a law of general application. So where was the Human Rights Commission when people started settling on the city's land that Chris was leasing? Where were they? They weren't there. The second Chris tried to use the law to remove people on that property, oh, here's the Human Rights Commission. So it's it selects kind of which rights in the Constitution it's gonna kind of enforce. And I mean, this is far from the only example of it. The Human Rights Commission is a political actor. It is a political hitman. Never see it as this kind of independent institution that's kind of part of the constitutional architecture. This is a depraved political hitman that is firmly in the pockets, not just of the ANC and the Doomsday Coalition, but in the pockets of very insidious I mean, it's such an amorphous thing. A very insidious Western internationalist. I'm not going to use the G word. I think it's a very abused word. But a Western international kind of cabal of people who have this kind of do-gooder syndrome. But they have it from Brussels, and they have it from London, and they have it from New York. And they don't actually understand how these things work in reality. And the documentary shows that perfectly with JP Smith's explanation of this law was adopted with a very specific thing kind of in mind. Like if someone lives somewhere and they're allowed to be there, and then for some unfortunate reason they can no longer pay to be there, then the law protects them from being kind of kicked out onto the street with their couch and their TV and so on. It's like that is what a law of this nature is meant to protect against. But what did the good do-gooders with this kind of very westernized suburban interpretation of how reality works give us? Land grabs, where people pitch a tent, they put down a chair somewhere, and suddenly this is now their home, even though it's on someone else's property, and you can't touch them. So it's a Human Rights Commission, ANC, NGO complex, really, that is posing a very big threat to property rights. And Joe, you said you only had one criticism. No, there's another one, and I know you don't want to give it the time of day, and that's the right assumption. But the other big criticism of your documentary is, how can you say these people are invading property on their own continent? Joe, you can't say that they're grabbing land. This is Africa. They can live where they want. That is the other thing. It is a race hustling kind of postmodernist hogwash that's obviously very, very calculated. But David said this. The victims of property deprivations in this country are not just white. I mean, obviously not. David Rogatse is a good example. But then also, if you go and look at a place like Alexandra in next to Sandton, there used to be that used to be a town. Like, it was a primarily black area where people built houses. Like, people lived there in their houses with yards. That doesn't exist anymore. Like, those property owners, those black property owners there, have basically been told to get lost. And now, kind of from the wall of their yard to the next wall is just shacks. Like, they have been completely kind of evicted from their own property, those black property owners. And it's the same in Khayelitsha, same in Mitchell's Plain. If you look closely, you actually see structures, houses built there, but they are completely surrounded by shacks, by people who moved in and effectively completely nullified the property rights of the relatively poor but socially mobile people who live there. So no, it's not. This is not a racial interests thing. The right to your home as your castle is so crucially important to every civilization, every cultural group, every kind of racial group, if you want to talk about race. This is just a non-negotiable. And when the law and the institutions tasked with upholding the law are so kind of complicit in depriving that right. And we all know why. We all understand what the National Democratic Revolution is. Anthea Jeffrey's book on this explains this perfectly. Create chaos. Create absolute chaos for property owners so that the state can blame capitalism and seize more power. That is what this is all kind of ultimately calculated towards doing, and the Expropriation Act is a great manifestation of this. So yeah, it's a perverse time we're living in as far as property rights are concerned, but you just can't go without it. If you chuck property rights, you're chucking your future. So we don't actually have a choice but to push back at this.
Yeah. So, Joe, if one criticism I would have was at the end of the documentary, you start exploring the pernicious impact of the Expropriation Act, and I think that deserves a lot more attention in future pieces of content that you produce. I understand that you were constrained with time, but I thought you did a pretty good job of summarizing it. But I think there's a lot more analysis from people like Mark Oppenheimer, Martin van Staden, and I'm sure somebody like Herman Pretorius at the Institute of Race Relations would also have some good things to say. Well, some hard-hitting things to say about the Expropriation Act. But Joe, I just wanted to maybe turn the lens on you. And, I think your journey has been really interesting in this space of online content creation. You really turned to YouTube during the COVID lockdowns. And I think you've really leveraged the medium really effectively. And I think in previous conversations, like what we've had with Leanne and others, we've really spoken about the importance of alternative media in South Africa for telling the truth. Martin is correct to say that you probably wouldn't see a documentary like this on some of the more mainstream channels. But do you have any advice for people who are entering into this space, who want to make a difference, tell powerful stories in South Africa, and that not only showcase the kind of policy problems that we discuss every week here on the pod, but also the human stories? Like, what would you say to an aspirant young documentary filmmaker or content creator about how to go about this very important work?
Thanks, David. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think the best way or the best advice I could give someone who's thinking about getting into this field is there's what I've noticed with people who think about it and are like, oh, I think I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start thinking this. Peter Sawanga, actually, who's in the comment section, is a very long-term friend of mine, known him for years, has been telling me for 5 years that he's going to start a podcast. So I'm going to give everybody the same advice I give him. Just do it. Just do it.
Come on,
Don't
Peter.
overthink it. Just do it. Because I think a lot of people get bogged down with, oh, what kind of mic am I going to get? What kind of camera? What's my background going to look like? When I started my YouTube channel, literally day one of the lockdowns. So it was the evening, I think it was Thursday evening. And I did a stream. I didn't have this fancy camera. I didn't have this background. I didn't have earphones or a nice mic. I literally just had those iPhone earphones and the camera on my laptop, and I went live, and I had like one view, and I just kept going. You just keep going, because it's gonna take time to find your voice. It's gonna take time to figure out what you really like, what you want your background to be, and all that stuff. If you spend your whole, in Peter's case, 5 years trying to plan this all out, you'll never start. And you need to start. You need to start so that you can learn your voice, you can learn what kind of content you like to produce, but also what kind of content audience likes to view and see. Like, it took me a while to come up with Newsflash. I was doing podcasts and other things before then, and then I decided to do like a news commentary show that kind of brings in a little bit of humor here and there, because I'm also a comedian, so I wanted to bring some humor into the commentary. And then from there it exploded, and I was like, okay, people like this, so I'm going to keep doing it. And the documentary was a happy accident, in the sense of like, I knew I wanted to maybe make a documentary one day. I didn't think it was going to come so soon, and I didn't think this was going to be the topic, but I kind of just stumbled onto it. And when you start something, when you start producing your own content, you don't know in what direction you're going to go in. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you feel comfortable, you feel confident, you know what your product is, and then you want to expand on it, or you want to build on it, or you want to, what's the next big thing I can do? And this documentary was kind of that for me. If you want to start off with documentaries, then again, just do it. I proved that you can do quite a nice documentary with zero budget, your phone and will, and a lot of favors asked, don't get me wrong. For example, the drone footage was my friend Sebastiano. He has a drone. I asked him very nicely if I could borrow it. I realized that I can't fly a drone, so I asked if he would operate it, and he said, yes, sure, I'll operate it. And he was gracious enough to help film that drone footage with no cost. And so big shout out to him again. Helene, who helped me, she's a journalist. She helped me with the interview with Chris. She's the one that asked that hard-hitting question to him, an emotional question. And he and again, she didn't charge me for that. She was very gracious to help, and all the people that were interviewed. So you got to use, if you're going to do it, have a vision, have a story, have a good story. Documentaries are difficult because you can't script them. You can have like a loose idea, like, okay, cool, the Tygerberg Raceway and land invasions. That was the idea. But you never know what you're going to uncover. I didn't know I was going to uncover what I uncovered. And then you just kind of got to be able to go with the flow and be like, okay, this came out. Who can I ask about this with regards to this topic? And you may have to do reshoots. Martin, we did 2 shoots together because I realized that what I asked you before wasn't exactly in line with the documentary. And you may have to do that, and so you do it. I think one of the biggest things I've learned, and probably really good advice I could give to another young documentary maker, is advice I got from Helene. For those of you who don't know, Chris was the last interview I did. I wanted him to be the first, but he's actually a very busy man, and I couldn't pin him down. It took quite a long time to get his interview, and I was getting impatient, and I really wanted to edit and get the documentary out as soon as possible. And there was a time where I was actually thinking of not including him, and Helene told me, "No, Joe, be patient, because it's better to be right than first." And I think that's a very, very valuable piece of advice, because I listened to her and I said, okay, I'll be patient. I'll get him. And boy, am I glad I did. I'm glad I was able to tell his story the way I did. And I think that's a very, very, very valuable for anyone in the news agency, in the work that we do in podcasting and stuff like that. It's better to be right than to be first. And I think that encompasses everything that you need to know about documentaries as well. Be right, not first. Do the research, put in the time. Don't think that you need big amounts of money unless you want to make it some Netflix documentary style thing. But you can do it with grit, with persistence, and a whole lot of favors.
Mm, mm. Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think the key message there that I get from it is that overthinking is the enemy. Just do it. Do it well when you've wrapped your head around
Like
it, but
Nike,
don't
just do it.
Yeah, just do it. And like the FMF's campaign for home rule, just do it. Just do it is such a key principle in our thinking as well. And then I think it just applies across the board. If you want to do something, worry about the details later. For now,
Yeah.
just get a move on.
And as Joe illustrated, you don't start out knowing everything about the topic. And I thought actually what was really cool about the documentary, it was also kind of a story of Joe's journey of discovery. It wasn't just about Chris, right? It was about, you discover new information, and then that sets you on a path to speak to somebody else. And through that, we as the audience really go on that journey with Joe together. So I think that was also a really important part of the docu. But yeah, I mean, I would say probably the lesson from you, Joe, is start out small, just produce content. If you think, I want to produce the next great documentary like Stolen Land, yeah, maybe you could, but I think don't underestimate the power of learning as you go, and you're iterating. You started the channel 5 years ago, and you've put out thousands of hours of content, right? So that equipped you with the skills of like how to build a narrative, how to focus on the production quality on a shoestring budget. So yeah, so I think show your work, put the stuff out there. Like this podcast, you may or may not know that we do extremely limited preparation for this podcast. We literally hit the go live button and we go. And sometimes the quality is maybe better than on other days. We don't always get it right, but we I think add some value to the public discourse before everybody clocks off for the weekend. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to you, Joe, for all the great work, and yeah, thanks for joining us on the pod today.
Thank you guys. The pleasure is all mine. And thank you guys so much for being so supportive of the documentary, and Martin for all your contributions. And I messaged you at late hours sometimes, and you were gracious enough to answer my questions. So thank you so much. And David, thank you guys as well for the podcast, for having me on, and also for the work that Free Market Foundation does. And I hope you guys will share the documentary far and wide, to help more South Africans get to know about it. And that's all I really ask from everybody watching, is go to the link that's just been shared. It's in the description. All the information is there. You can watch the documentary, you can donate to the next one. Everything's there. So thank you guys so much, and keep sharing. Please keep sharing.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Joe. We will certainly do so from our side. Um, it will be included in the RS post as well. So we really do encourage everyone to watch the documentary and to consider supporting Joe for the next one. I think this and seeing more of this does mean someone has to pay. That's the reality of life, and then really we encourage everyone who understands that these stories need to be told in this format to give 5 rand, give 10 rand. If you give a little bit, someone else is going to give a little bit, and it's going to grow big. So yeah, please do so. But I think that brings us to the end of this week's Rational Standard podcast. Um, as we keep pointing out, this year has been very crazy. There was a lull there, but the empty suit that calls himself our president has ensured that this week was not one of those. So we have a lot to keep our eyes on over this weekend and into next week. Please subscribe to the Rational Standard if you enjoy our content. Please click the bell icon to ensure that you are notified of any new updates. Please like the video if you liked it. If you didn't like it, don't do anything. Please visit rationalstandard.com. It's a primarily Substack based platform. We have a lot of articles that we publish up there. So please go there and like and restack our content, and of course share it as well on other social media platforms. And yeah, set a reminder on your phone. We will be back next week, Friday at around 12. And we look forward to seeing you then again. And yeah, thank you to everyone who has joined us live. We had a nice big crowd today. And thank you to everyone who watches our content over the weekend. That's it from us. Go well.